Hey, it's Nick Digilio. How you doing? Hey, thanks for checking out my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. If you're on my Patreon page, please become a patron. All of the videos and the content that I provide are DIY, and I could use your support. And if you do become a patron by donating $3, $6, $9, $25 a month, you'll get some bonus stuff, including the real true story of what happened at WGN behind the scenes. If you become a patron, you'll get that. You will get that story exclusively, and you can go to patreon.com/NickDShow. Patreon.com/NickDShow. Become a patron now. My podcast is up. Episode 2 came out today. It is Friday, and it includes Eric and Steve and I giving our lists of the best movies of 2021, and my buddy Esmeralda Leon and I discuss hand lotion, Play-Doh scented perfume, among many other things. So subscribe right now at radiomisfits.com or wherever you get your podcast. Please subscribe, give it a listen, and we want as many people as possible to listen to the podcast. Check it out, the Nick D podcast on the Radio Misfits Network, podcast network. So please check it out. So, just the other day, I made a video about Bill Jackson passing away, BJ and the Dirty Dragon. And it seems, and I said in that video, it seems like every day the Grim Reaper has taken somebody else in the world of celebrity or whatever. It all started with Betty White on New Year's Eve, and it just continues. It seems like every day somebody is passing away. Bob Saget, Sidney Poitier, Yvette Mimieux, and the list goes on. Ronnie Spector, and BJ and the Dragon, and Pat Brickhouse passed away, and it seems just like every day someone has passed away. And I wake up this morning, Friday morning, and Meatloaf died. Meatloaf, obviously legendary singer, songwriter, worked with Jim Steinman, who also passed away recently. And their legendary album Bat Out of Hell, which has sold millions and millions and millions of copies. Meatloaf, an incredibly popular rock artist, has sold millions of records and has sold out concerts and all kinds of stuff. He passed away. He was 74 years old. They haven't released an official cause of death. Some people say it may have been COVID. Others, say it hasn't. It's not official yet. But the fact is, he was only 74 years old and he passed away. And in the music world, it's a huge thing. And again, just every other day, somebody passes away. And enough already. Jesus. And I mentioned in the video, and I also mentioned on the new episode of the podcast, about how it seems like every year, at the beginning of each year, it seems like January is filled with a lot of celebrity deaths and deaths of people who are well known, and it just happens for like the first few weeks of every year. It's like bang, 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 and that's certainly the case here for 2022. So enough. Meatloaf, legendary singer, and I was very sad to miss. I missed last year's the Flashback Horror Convention. I was going through a bad time during that. I was preparing to get my life back in order. I did not have a media outlet at that time, so I chose not to go to the Flashback Horror Convention because I felt like, I wouldn't be doing my job, promoting Flashback. I really didn't have an avenue to do that. Now I do. I have my podcast and tons of people are listening to it, and hopefully you will, and download it and subscribe and all that stuff. So I skipped last year's Flashback because I really wasn't ready to go out into the public and do anything. And I skipped. It was the first one I skipped since 2002, since the very first one. It was the only time I ever missed the Flashback convention. And Meatloaf was there. Meatloaf was at the Flashback convention just this past August. And I've heard from everybody who went, and from Mike and Mia Kurz, who are the hosts and the people who invited him, that he couldn't have been nicer. He couldn't have been more accommodating. He was unbelievable with the fans. He took his time. He signed everything that was given to him, took pictures. Incredibly nice guy. Told amazing stories of being in the business for such a long time, and said that one of the best guests they've ever had in the history of the Flashback Horror Convention, which is celebrating its 20th year this year. And by the way, I will be back. I will be back in August at the Flashback Horror Convention. I will be hosting things. I will be doing Q&As, doing all the stuff that I did before. I only missed last year, but I am back for the 20th anniversary this year of Flashback Horror Convention. That'll be up in August at the Hyatt Regency at O'Hare. But anyway, I missed it, and I missed meeting Meatloaf, and I regret not going to Flashback for every reason, but one of them includes the fact that I missed Meatloaf. So anyway, he passed away, and it's really sad, 74 years old. But I wanted to concentrate on Meatloaf in the movies. He also acted quite a bit. Obviously, you know this. Acted quite a bit, appeared in a ton of television shows. He was in reality shows as well. He appeared on the Celebrity Apprentice, as well as other reality shows. But he did movies too, and he was quite a fun actor. He did a good job in a lot of movies. So I thought I'd talk about Meatloaf in the movies, and so things like that. Now, we all know about Rocky Horror. That was the first one. That was the big one. He played Eddie in Rocky Horror, in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Frank killed him. He was also like he was a singer. He played Eddie. He was a singer. He was a dead guy, and he had a memorable appearance in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And that was the first time that everybody really saw Meatloaf. And right around that same time is when Bat Out of Hell came out, and boom, like a lightning bolt, Meatloaf hit the entertainment world running. After appearing in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and then the initial release of Rocky Horror wasn't very successful, but then a couple of years after that, it became the midnight cult movie, classic that it is now. And his role is, classic. It was a part that was, made famous on stage, and then he played it in the movie. And so Meatloaf and Rocky Horror Picture Show got his movie career started. And again, it coincided with the release of Bat Out of Hell, right around the same time Bat Out of Hell came out a couple of years later. And then that was it. He was on the ground running. But he appeared in a lot of movies, and there are a few that I wanted to mention. He was in stuff all the way up until, up until a few years ago. He was in Masters of Horror, which was this series on Showtime that Mick Garris put together, and he got some of the greatest horror film directors of all time. And, each one of these directors directed an episode of Masters of Horror. And it had everybody. They got everybody, who was around at that time, including, John Carpenter and Joe Dante and John Landis. Dario Argento, the director of Suspiria and so many other great horror films, directed a couple of them. One of them was called Pelts. And Meatloaf was in it. And Meatloaf was the star of Dario Argento's Pelts. And he was terrific in it, and it was a really good episode of Masters of Horror. And so you can check him out in that. He was in Blood Rain, which was kind of a terrible horror/video game movie. He was in The Salton Sea with Val Kilmer, quite memorable in that. Black Dog is another one that he was in with. It was an action movie with truck drivers, and Patrick Swayze was the lead in that. Meatloaf was terrific in Black Dog. Spice World, for God's sake, he's in Spice World with the Spice Girls. He's great in that. He's hilarious in it. I love that movie, by the way. You should check out, if you've not seen Spice World, the Spice Girls movie. Really funny, really clever movie. Very, very, lots of fun. Meatloaf is in Spice World. You can check him out in that. Leap of Faith with Steve Martin and Deborah Winger, which was sort of the satire of evangelists, televangelists, and touring evangelists, and people, ministers and fire and brimstone and curing people of their illnesses and all that stuff. Meatloaf is terrific in that. He's got a great part in Leap of Faith. He appears in Wayne's World, one of the many rock stars and cameos in both of the Wayne's World movies, and Meatloaf is in Wayne's World. He was in Out of Bounds, the terrible Anthony Michael Hall thriller from like the late 80s, 86, I want to say, where Anthony Michael Hall played it was like a mistaken identity. Richard Tuggle directed it, the guy who directed Tightrope with Clint Eastwood. And it's a terrible movie, but the one great thing about Out of Bounds is that Cities and Dust, the fucking great Susie and the Banshees song, was initially featured in Out of Bounds. The one good thing about Out of Bounds is that Cities and Dust, the classic Susie and the Banshees song, is in that movie, and that's where we first heard it. But Meatloaf is in Out of Bounds as well. He was in Scavenger Hunt, this goofy movie from the late 70s with like an all-star cast. It's a mad world, but like with 70s B movie stars. Americathon with John Ritter, which was about a telethon to save America. and Meatloaf was in that. But the one movie that I really want to mention, which was the only movie that he ever was the star of, like in all these other movies, he was in Fight Club. Of course, I do want to mention Fight. How can I not mention Fight Club? In Fight Club, he played Robert Bob Paulson, who the narrator Edward Norton meets in one of the many support group meetings that he crashes. This one being survivors of testicular cancer. And Meatloaf is great, and then eventually Meatloaf joins Fight Club, becomes part of Project Mayhem. He's fucking great in Fight Club. He's great as Robert Bob Paulson, the guy with bitch tits, as the narrator says. It's a great performance. It's a funny performance. It's a beautiful performance. I think it's as an actor, I think it's the best thing that Meatloaf has ever done. He's great in it. He's part of a legendary movie. He's part of a few legendary movies, but in particular, he's a major part and a major reason why Fight Club is so good as Robert Bob Paulson, the guy with bitch tits. He's great in it, and he's got fight scenes in it. He's got emotional scenes in it where he breaks down and cries. It's very, very funny, and it's dark, and he's great. One of my favorite things, very quick memory about it, is that in the New York Times, when they review, or when they write columns in the New York Times, when they say someone, like say that they were writing a column about Edward Norton, okay? And they're saying Edward Norton stars in Fight Club. And then once they say the name Edward Norton, once it's in the article as Edward Norton, from that point on, he's referred to as Mr. Norton. And that's just a thing that they do, in some publications. The New York Times does it all the time. Once your full name is referred to, then you are now Mr. Like if it's, Melanie Griffith, you are then Miss Griffith or Mrs. Griffith, for the rest of the article. So it's a common thing. So when the New York Times review of Fight Club came out, this is one of my favorite things. And the New York Times review of Fight Club came out, and it mentioned Meatloaf, and his part, because his part's essential in the movie. And during the review, they say Meatloaf plays this part, blah, blah, blah. I'll never forget this. Later, when he is referred to again in the New York Times article, they refer to him as Mr. Loaf. Because that's what they do. They take the last name and put Mr. in front of him. So Edward Norton, and then later in the article, he's Mr. Norton. So early in the article, he's Meatloaf in the review of Fight Club, and then later in the article, he's Mr. Loaf. So after that movie came out, I referred to Meatloaf many times as Mr. Loaf, because the New York Times referred to him as Mr. Loaf. So Mr. Loaf, the one big movie that I want to mention is this weird, wonderful oddity that came out in 1980 that was meant to be like a launching vehicle for Meatloaf to be a leading man. This was his movie. Like, he was the star, and they pushed it. And it came out in 1980, and this was like at sort of the height of Meatloaf's popularity in the music world. And so it's a movie called Roadie. And he's the star of it. Like, it's not a small part, it's not a cameo, it's not a supporting role. He's the star. This was like his movie. This was the movie that was going to make Meatloaf a movie star in addition to a million-selling rock singer, music guy. This was it. And it was called Roadie. And insanely, it was directed by Alan Rudolph. It was one of Alan Rudolph's first movies. Alan Rudolph, who is, was a friend of Robert Altman and worked in that LA world. Alan Rudolph became this still an incredible filmmaker who made some of the best, most original, most iconic independent films of the 80s and into the early 90s. Alan Rudolph is an amazing filmmaker. He did stuff like A Love at Large and The Moderns. He did Made in Heaven, Trouble in Mind, which is a masterpiece. He did Mortal Thoughts with Demi Moore and Bruce Willis and Glenn Headley. He did Choose Me, which is an amazing movie. He did Mrs. Parker and the Vicious Circle. This guy, Alan Rudolph, is a student of Robert Altman and a student of the avant-garde film world. And during that strong period in the 80s and all the way up into the mid-90s, he made a back-to-back-to-back amazing, brilliant, odd, and really wonderful movies. And he's the guy who directed Roadie and co-wrote it. And Roadie is this ridiculous movie where Meatloaf plays this good old boy from Texas who loves music, is obsessed with music, and idolizes and worships a lot of the big movie or music stars, and becomes a roadie and starts touring around and hanging out with bands and doing doing what roadies do. So he's like, yeah, I'll be a roadie. I'll tour around the country, and I'll carry all the equipment. I'll set up the stage. I'll do all this stuff. And by association, by being a roadie, like, he wants to be the best roadie ever. That's his job. He gets to hang out, go on the road, travel around, and meet rock stars and all kinds of stuff. And he becomes obsessed with this young girl played by Khaki Hunter. Khaki Hunter, by the way, who only appeared in a few movies. And I don't really know what she's doing now. She only made a few movies, mostly remembered for the Porky's series. That's probably the biggest series of movies that she was in. She was like the female lead in the Porky's movies, and the female romantic interest in the Porky's movies. Adorable actress who I had a crush on. Khaki Hunter appeared in a bunch of other things, but she was the female lead that Meatloaf kind of had a crush on and kind of follows her around. And she's a groupie who wants to lose her virginity to Alice Cooper in this movie, Roadie. And Meatloaf is trying to, keep an eye on her and take care of her. He kind of has a crush on her. But her goal is to be the greatest groupie of all time and to lose her virginity to Alice Cooper. His goal is to be the greatest roadie of all time and to go on the road with all the rock stars. And that's it. And he has wacky adventures. Fucking Art Carney is in this movie. It is this crazy. Gaylord Sartain is in it. It's loaded with weird character actors. It's got Alan Rudolph's kind of very quirky sensibility, but it's an insanely goofy-ass movie, like a really crazy movie. I had a poster of it on my wall when I was like 15. It came out in 1980, and I had a poster of Roadie on my wall because I found the movie so weird, and I just thought the poster was cool, the artwork on the poster. It looked like the cover of a Mad magazine. But the cameos in the movie, and performances, because there are some great rock performances in this movie. Alan Rudolph got some, at the time in 1980, got these people, some legends and some rock people to show up, and they have great rock performances in the movie. It's a rock and roll movie, in addition to being a really ridiculous movie with Meatloaf playing this ridiculous, good old boy from Texas as a roadie, and Khaki Hunter playing this sweet, goofy little girl. It's got great rock performances in it, and included is the aforementioned Alice Cooper, who is also in Wayne's World with Meatloaf, but Alice Cooper is in it not only as the object of desire for Khaki Hunter, but he's in the movie and he performs music. Blondie is in it. They perform. Blondie performs in the movie. Debbie Harry has some other scenes in the film as well. Roy Orbison is in the movie. This was in 1980. This was before Blue Velvet came out. And in the mid to late 80s, when Roy Orbison had that comeback with the Traveling Wilburys and everything, when people, again, once realized who Roy Orbison was. This was before that. Alan Rudolph put Roy Orbison in the movie. He performs in it. Hank Williams Jr. performs in it. Asleep at the Wheel performs in it. And so there are all these rock stars in it, and it intercuts these great concert performances with this ridiculous slapstick, over-the-top shit that happens. Wacky comedy, Meatloaf falling on his ass and doing goofy things, and there's double takes, way over-the-top ridiculous comedy, and Meatloaf's terrific in it. And this was going to be the movie that made Meatloaf a star. It didn't happen, because the movie's really weird and really crazy. I know it's available on DVD. I don't know if they've got a Blu-ray out on it. But I loved it. I saw it a few times in the theater. I had the poster up on my wall. I've not seen it in years. This is a movie I've not gone back and seen. I probably haven't seen this movie in 35 years. So it's been that long. But I just remember really liking it. I remember loving Meatloaf in it. And that was the big movie that was going to make Meatloaf a star. So, been in a ton of movies. Some of them are fun. Obviously, the Rocky Horror Picture Show is legendary and iconic. And as far as serious, really great acting, he's fantastic in Fight Club. And then you can see him peppered throughout TV and movies all over the place. But don't forget that at one movie, he was a leading man. One movie, he was the star. His name was above the fucking title. Meatloaf in Roadie, directed by Alan Rudolph. It's so weird that this thing exists. It's so strange. But it's definitely worth checking out. So, my condolences to the family. He was 74, and kids and wife. They were all at his side when he passed away. And obviously his contribution to music was huge. Bat Out of Hell, and then the sequel to Bat Out of Hell, in 1993, some years after the release of Bat Out of Hell. Again, huge. Jim Steinman would never have had the kind of success that he continued to have if Meatloaf didn't, interpret his songs the way that he did, in all the dramatic grandeur that Jim Steinman's songs demand. Meatloaf was great. I got to see him live in concert a couple of times. He was fucking great. Obviously, the music is great, and the TV appearances and the movie appearances are awesome. But check out Roadie. I really, really, really should. This was the movie that should have made Meatloaf a movie star. This was the movie that he could have been a leading man. And I don't know where Khaki Hunter is. I'd like to find her, because she was lovely and cute and wonderful. And again, appeared in all the Porky's movies and Roadie. That's kind of all she did. But yeah, Meatloaf was a leading man. It was in one movie, and it was called Roadie. So check it out. So, bon voyage to a better place, Mr. Loaf. I love you, Mr. Loaf. So yeah. And by the way, Grim Reaper, fuck off. All right? Please. Just fuck off, Grim Reaper. All right.